This is section 11.6, the quadratic formula. Okay, so the first thing there in your book on page 483 is just a table of when each one of these methods is a good idea. You don't have to write it. If you want to, you can, but you don't have to. So we've gone over 3 different ways, or we're going to go over 3 different ways of, actually we're going over 4 different ways, because we've got graphing, factoring, completing the square, and then this formula we're going to do. So there's 4 different ways to actually solve all of these equations out. It's situational, which way works best. Usually the ones I revert to are using this quadratic formula, because it's not too terrible to remember, or I do graphing just because that's sometimes easy. Depending on the different situations, sometimes factoring is nice too, like if it's already put into 2 parentheses groups and equal to 0, factoring is a shoe-in way to do it. Completing the square is miserable no matter what way you do it, I always think. It just kind of depends on how it's set up, which one you want to do. On the test, they'll be split into their sections already, so you don't have to worry about figuring out which one's best. It'll just say, you know, this section use quadratic formula, this section use graphing. So it'll tell you right away. So if you want to look at that chart, you can, but you don't have to. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we are going to do quadratic formula. Quadratic formula seems like this long, crazy thing, but really you're just plugging in and solving. You don't have to do a ton of thinking. It's more just like plug and chug, where you just plug the stuff in and then solve it out. Okay, it's not, you know, complicated. Well, it's not as complicated as the completing the square stuff we were doing in the last section. Okay, so first thing we've got here is we've got our x. So we're always solving for x when we're solving these problems out. And you're always going to want to be in the form, so like your equations here, you're always going to have y equals, and then your a is always in front of your x squared, your b is in front of your x, and then your c is your constant. So we've talked a little bit about that before. Another thing you're going to want here is instead of that y there, it's going to be a 0. So that when we solve all this out, your y value is 0, and then your x value is on that x-axis. Okay, so basically all we do is we figure out what those numbers are, so what your a is, what your b is, what your c is, and then you plug it into this formula here. This formula is always going to be x is equal to negative b, or the opposite of b, so just switching the sign of the b basically, plus or minus, because we're dealing with the square roots. And then under our square root is going to be b squared minus 4ac, and then that whole thing is divided by 2a. Okay? And you'll have your notes for this, so you won't have to remember that off the top of your head or anything. You can use your notes. Okay, so what we're going to do here to start is we've got to make sure that our equation is set up in our form and equal to 0. So just like we were doing with the factoring, we want all of these to equal 0. Next thing that we do here is we figure out what our a is, our b is, and our c is. So our a value goes with our x squared, so our a is going to be 2. Our b value goes with your x, so our b is going to be negative 5 because it's minus 5. And then our c value is going to be 3, the one that's by itself, that's the constant. So then what we do is we just use that formula there, and we plug in our different variables. So we'll go x is equal to negative b, so negative, and then your b there is also negative, so negative times the negative 5, be careful with that, plus or minus square root of b squared, so we've got negative 5 squared, and anytime you square a negative, make sure it's in parentheses, minus 4 times our a value, which is 2, times our c value, which is 3, and then that whole top part is divided by 2 times our a value, which is 2. Okay, so then we start solving this out. So here, so I'm going to go x equals, I can simplify this out a little bit because I know negative times my negative 5 is going to become a positive 5, plus or minus, and then underneath my square root I can do a little bit of solving here. So if I take negative 5 and square it, that's 25, minus, and then I can multiply all these values. So 4 times 2 would be 8, times 3 would be 24. So that's 24 there, over, and then my bottom there, 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, so I can do a little bit more simplifying here because I can take 25 minus 24, so I'm going to go equals 5 plus or minus square root now, and if I do 25 minus 24, I get 1. So now I've got square root of 1, and then all that stuff's over 4. Now if I take a square root of 1, that's going to come out nice to be 1. So when I rewrite this out here, I'll do it off to the side here. 5 plus or minus, when I do the square root of 1, it is 1 over 4. And then after we get rid of that square root there, now we have the plus or the minus, so you can break it into two different things here, one with the plus 1 and one with minus 1. So you could go 5 plus 1 over 4, 5 minus 1 over 4, so 5 plus 1 would be 6 over 4. If we divide by 4, that would be 1.5. So x is equal to 1.5. And then over here, 5 minus 1 is 4, divided by 4 would be 1. So our other one is x is equal to 1. So those would be your two values there. So not a whole lot of thinking, mostly just plugging in and following your different steps. Okay, next one here, same thing, we want it to be everything on one side and equal to 0. Then we figure out what our a, our b, and our c are. So our a value here would be -1 because it's a negative in front of the x squared. Our b value would be the 6 because that's what's in front of the x. And then our c value is -9. Okay, so then we use that formula there. So x is equal to negative, and then our b value, so 6 plus or minus square root of b squared, so 6 squared minus 4 times our a value, which is -1, times our c value, which is -9, and then all of that is over 2 times our a value, which is -1. Okay, so we got everything plugged in. Now we do a little bit of simplifying here. So we'd have x is equal to -6 plus or minus, and then under our square root we'll do a little simplifying. So 6 squared would be 36. And then here we would go, I usually just do minus here and then ignore that, subtract, and I would go 4 times -1 would be -4, times the -9 would be positive 36. So 36 minus 36 there, over, and then 2 times -1 is -2. And then here I know if I do 36 minus 36, that comes out to be 0 there. So this would be x is equal to -6 plus or minus square root of 0 over -2. When I do the square root of 0, it comes out to be 0. So this would be x is equal to -6 plus or minus 0 over -2. Now what's kind of convenient about this one is if I take -6 and I add 0 to it, it's still -6, and if I take -6 and I subtract 0 from it, it's still -6. So really both of these here are going to be -6 over -2. So I'm only actually going to come out with one answer here of x is equal to 3. So this would be a situation when we graph it where basically it's kind of like that, where it's only crossing that axis in one spot. So sometimes you'll have that where it's just one answer there. Every time that it's one answer, your square root thing, or under your square root, is always going to be 0. So if you get to under your square root of 0, you should only have one answer for that. Okay, try another one here. Alright, so this one looks like we're in a good position here where we've got all of our stuff on one side equaling 0, so then we figure out our a value is -2, our b value is 3, and our c value is -5. Then we plug into our formula or our equation. So we would go x is equal to -b, so -3 plus or minus square root of our b squared, so 3 squared minus 4 times our a value, which is -2, times our c value, which is -5, over 2 times our a value, which is -2. Okay, then I try to simplify this out a little bit. So I've got x is equal to negative 3 plus or minus under my square root. 3 squared is 9 minus, and then I would do 4 times negative 2, which would be negative 8, and then times negative 5, which would be 40. So I'd have 9 minus 40. And then to keep going from there, I would have 2 times negative 2 would be negative 4. So then x is equal to negative 3 plus or minus my square root here. So now I'm going to do 9 minus 40, which is going to come out to be a negative 31 over negative 4. Now if we remember from the previous couple sections, when I go and I take the square root of a negative, so if I went square root of negative 31, we remember that I get an error with that. So if you ever get a situation like this where you're taking the square root of a negative, this is one of those where it's going to be no solutions. Okay, so you don't even have to keep solving from there, because if you've got a negative under your square root, just like the previous section, we can't do that. You'll get an error on your calculator. So if you ever get that, you just put no solutions. Okay. Last one of these here. We've got x squared plus 4x plus 2 is equal to 0, so we're in a good form. So we go, our a is equal to, so since there's nothing in front of our x value, it's just going to be a 1, or our x squared value, it'll be a 1. Our b is going to be 4, that's in front of our x, and then our c is going to be 2, would be our constant. Alright, then we plug into our equation. X is equal to negative b, so negative 4, plus or minus square root of our b squared, so 4 squared, minus 4 times, oops, not a, 4 times 1, times our c value, which is 2, over 2 times our a value, which is 1. Okay, so then we figure this out here. So we'd have x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus under our square root. 4 squared is 16 minus 4 times 1 is 4 times 2 is 8 over 2 times 1 is 2. And then you go from there. So we would go x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus. If I take under my square root 16 minus 8, that would be 8 over 2. Now the problem here is when we do square root of 8, it doesn't come out nice. So like if I did on my calculator square root of 8, it comes out to be a number, so it's not an error like the previous one, but it doesn't come out to be anything nice. It comes out to be one of those weird decimals. So just like on the previous section, you just leave this as square root of 8. You don't take it to a decimal or anything unless you're doing a problem like a story problem where they want an actual answer. So this one we actually don't have to go any further, and that is good enough for your answer. Okay, so you don't have to break it into the two things. Now if you wanted to, you could go x is equal to negative 4 plus square root of 8 over 2, and then x is equal to negative 4 minus square root of 8 over 2. I would take both of those as well, but you would have to write both of those separately, where here you can just keep it all together. So I'd either take that one or those two together. Either way, those are both the same answer. Okay, so it's not written here, but let's try on page 485. Try out A and B, just so we can kind of see how we're doing here. So 485, try out A and B. So for A, you should get for your x's, x is equal to negative 1, and x is equal to 3. And then for B, your x's should be, and then this is kind of a weird one, kind of like this here. Actually, this is this problem right here. So it is negative 4 plus or minus square root of 8 over 2. So that is actually, B of that is actually this same problem that we actually already did. Okay, we got one more problem here, story problem. So we got a punter kicks the ball with an upward velocity of 58 feet per second. His foot meets the ball 1 foot off the ground, and then we've got the formula h of t is equal to negative 16t squared plus 58t plus 1, where h of t is the ball's height for any time t after the ball was kicked. And we're supposed to figure out what the hang time is here. Okay, so when we're talking about hang time, basically what we've got, so draw my little graph here. If this is my little kicker guy, I'll put his foot up there. Okay, so that's his foot, and he's kicking the ball right there. And they say his foot meets the ground 1 foot off the ground, so that's at 1 foot. So then what's going to happen here is the ball is going to go up, do what it does, and then eventually it's going to come back down. Okay? What hang time is it's the amount of time from the time that it hits his foot right here all the way until it touches the ground. So basically we want to find that spot right there where this is going to touch the ground, or what our 0 is. Okay? Because we're looking for 0 for our height. Okay, so what we do is we take that equation they had there, and instead of h of t, we're going to put a 0 there because that h of t stands for our height, which in this case we want it to be 0, right? Because we want it to be coming back and touching the ground. So the height of the ball when it touches the ground is at 0 feet. So instead of a height there, we're going to plug a 0 in. I don't know if you can see that picture there. Here's the picture. Okay, so let's do that then. So our height will plug in a 0. So 0 is equal to, and then you got that same formula, negative 16t squared plus 58t plus 1. And then you just solve that out just like we were doing with our quadratic formula. So x is equal to, or really in this case it's t, since that's our variable there, but x is fine too. We should figure out our a, b, and our c. So our a is negative 16, our b is 58, and our c is 1. Okay, so our t is equal to negative b, so negative 58, plus or minus square root of 58 squared, minus 4 times our a, which is negative 16, times our c, which is 1. And then that is over 2 times our a value, which is negative 16. Alright, let's simplify this out a little bit. So negative 58 plus or minus square root, and 58 squared is probably a pretty big number. So if I take 58 to the power of 2, 3,364 minus, and then we'll take 4 times negative 16 times 1, which would be negative 64. And we know if it's subtracting by a negative, that comes out to be addition, right? Okay, and then that's all going to be over 2 times our negative 16, which is negative 32. Okay, so then we'll probably want to solve what's underneath our square root there. So we'd have t is equal to negative 58 plus or minus, and then under our square roots, if we take those two values and add them, so 3,364 plus 64, we get 3,428 over negative 32. Now, in a typical problem, we would just leave it like this, because if we take square root of 3,428, it doesn't come out nice. But since this is a real-life problem and we want this to come out to be a certain amount of seconds, if I said this was our seconds amount, that doesn't really make any sense to us for a hang time, so we actually do want to take it out to be a decimal. So from here, what I would do is I would break this into my two separate ones, one being plus that, one being minus. So I would have t is equal to negative 58 plus square root of 3,428 divided by negative 32. And then my other one would be t is equal to negative 58 minus square root of 3,428 over negative 32, and then I would solve both of those out, and they're both going to come out to be goofy decimals, so I put my squiggly equal signs. Okay, so I'm just going to plug this all in here. So if I did negative 58 plus second square root of 3,428, I get that, and then if I divide that by a negative 32, I get a negative 0.017 will go 3 positions there, and that would be seconds. And then same thing here, I'll just plug it in, so I'll do negative 58, this time minus second square root of 3,428, enter, and then divide that by negative 32. So that would be 3.642, and that would be seconds. So if we think back to what our actual problem was asking, they wanted our hang time here. Well, only one of these really makes sense for a time in seconds, because if we're dealing with a negative amount of seconds, that doesn't really make sense. So this positive number here is going to be our amount of seconds that we're going to want. So 3.642 seconds would be our answer for when it's going to hit the ground or the end of our hang time. Now that other number there, that negative number, would be if the graph kept going this way. That would be our negative number where that would end up. Okay, so that is it for notes. So your book page assignment is page 486, 12 to 24 even, and then number 27.